I was standing in my garage in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, staring at my brand new generator when I heard the sharp rap of knuckles against my front door that would change everything. The summer heat had already knocked out power to half the neighborhood 3 times that month, and I had finally done something about it. The 12,000-watt Generac sat gleaming on its concrete pad, professionally installed with a proper transfer switch and everything up to code. I had dropped nearly $8,000 on the whole setup, but after spending 2 sweltering nights without air conditioning in 110-degree heat, it was worth every penny. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and headed inside, passing through the cool interior of my house. The generator was humming quietly outside, powering my AC refrigerator and a few essential circuits. I opened the door to find Brenda Patterson standing on my porch, her arms crossed over her chest and her face pinched into that expression I had come to dread over the past 2 years since she had taken over as HOA president. "Oliver," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to talk about your generator situation." I leaned against the doorframe, already exhausted by whatever was coming. "What about it, Brenda?" "The HOA board had an emergency meeting last night," she said, pulling a folder from under her arm. "We have decided that in the interest of community welfare, your generator needs to be shared with the rest of the block during power outages." I actually laughed. I could not help it. "You are joking." Her eyes narrowed. "I am absolutely not joking, Oliver Thompson. We have elderly residents on this street. We have families with young children. Your selfish hoarding of resources during a crisis is unacceptable." "Selfish hoarding?" I repeated, feeling my blood pressure rise. "I bought this generator with my own money. I paid for the installation. I am paying for the fuel and maintenance. How is that selfish?" Brenda thrust a piece of paper at me. "According to HOA bylaws, Section 12, subsection 4, any amenity that could be considered essential to health and safety during an emergency falls under community resource guidelines. We are invoking that clause." I took the paper and scanned it quickly. The language was vague enough to be interpreted a dozen different ways. Typical HOA nonsense. "This is about swimming pools and clubhouses, not private property that homeowners purchase themselves." "The board has voted," Brenda said firmly, 4-1. "When the power goes out, you will be required to run extension cords to the homes of Mrs. Chen next door, the Ramirez family across the street, and the Hendersons 2 houses down, at minimum. We are being generous by not requiring you to power the entire block." "Generous?" I felt my face getting hot, and not from the Arizona sun. "Brenda, do you have any idea how generators work? Mine is rated for 12,000 watts. That is enough for my house and maybe one other if we are careful about what we run. You are talking about 4 houses minimum. That would overload the system immediately." She waved her hand dismissively. "I am sure you are exaggerating. My cousin has a generator and he says they can handle much more than the manufacturers claim. Besides, people would just be running essentials, refrigerators, maybe a fan or 2. "Your cousin is wrong," I said flatly. "And even if the generator could somehow handle it, which it cannot, the fuel consumption would quadruple. I would be spending hundreds of dollars a day, keeping everyone else comfortable." "Then we will set up a community fund," Brenda said, as if this solved everything. "Everyone will contribute their fair share." "No," I said simply. "The answer is no, Brenda. This is my property, purchased with my money, installed on my land. You cannot force me to share it." Her face went red. "The HOA can and will enforce this, Oliver. If you refuse to comply, we will begin fining you. $200 a day until you cooperate." "You are out of your mind," I said. "I will fight this." "You do that," she snapped. "The fines start the next time the power goes out, which, according to the weather forecast, will probably be this weekend when temperatures hit 115. I hope your stubbornness is worth it." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete. I stood there for a long moment, the paper crumpling in my fist. This was insane, even for Brenda, even for this HOA. This was completely insane. I went back inside and immediately called my neighbor, Frank Morrison, the one board member who I knew had a functioning brain. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Frank, please tell me Brenda is making this up about the generator," I said. He sighed heavily. "I wish I could, Oliver. I voted against it for what it is worth. But Brenda got Donna and Richard and Tom all worked up about community spirit and emergency preparedness. They would not listen to reason. This is going to be a disaster," I said. "My generator cannot handle 4 houses. It just cannot." "I know," Frank said. "I tried to tell them. I even looked up the specs on your model and showed them the math. Brenda said we would cross that bridge when we came to it. And the fines? Oh, those are real. Brenda already had the paperwork drawn up. She has been planning this since she saw your generator installed last month." I sat down heavily on my couch. "Can she actually do this, legally?" "I have no idea. You would need to talk to a lawyer. But the HOA can definitely fine you, and if you do not pay, they can put a lien on your house eventually. Whether any of this would hold up in court is another question." This is insane, I muttered. You are preaching to the choir, Frank said. Look, my advice, consult with a lawyer before the weekend. Get ahead of this. Brenda is not going to back down, and you know how she gets when she thinks she is right. After I hung up with Frank, I spent the next hour researching HOA law in Arizona. It was not encouraging reading. HOAs in this state had broad authority, but there were limits. The problem was that fighting them meant time and money, both of which I would rather spend on literally anything else. Still, I was not about to let Brenda bully me into destroying my generator. I called 3 lawyers that afternoon. The first 2 did not handle HOA disputes. The third, a woman named Sarah Chen, agreed to meet with me the next day. She sounded cautiously optimistic that we could fight this, but warned me it would not be cheap or quick. That evening, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Margaret Chen from next door, holding a casserole dish and looking apologetic. Oliver, I am so sorry about all this, as she said. I never asked Brenda to include me in that generator scheme. I do not want to be part of this. I invited her in and we sat in my kitchen while she explained. Apparently, Brenda had gone door to door after leaving my house, telling everyone that I had generously agreed to share my generator with the neediest families on the block. She had specifically mentioned Mrs. Chen, who was 78 and lived alone, as someone who needed the help. I told her I did not need it, Mrs. Chen said firmly. I have managed just fine during outages before. I have battery-powered fans and plenty of water. I go to the community center if it gets really bad. But Brenda insisted that it was a safety issue. She is using you as emotional leverage, I said, finally understanding Brenda's angle. She knows no one wants to be the guy who lets the elderly neighbor suffer in the heat. Exactly, Mrs. Chen said. And I wanted you to know that I see right through it. You do not owe me or anyone else access to something you paid for yourself. I thanked her for coming over, and she left me the casserole, which turned out to be excellent. But her visit did not make me feel better about the situation. Brenda was already spinning the narrative, making me out to be the villain. By the time the next power outage hit, half the neighborhood would probably think I was personally responsible for any heat-related suffering. Friday afternoon, I met with Sarah Chen at her office in Scottsdale. She was in her 40s, sharply dressed, and had a reputation for not backing down from HOA boards. After I explained the situation, she pulled up the HOA bylaws on her computer and spent 20 minutes reading through them. This is a stretch, she finally said. A big stretch. The clause Brenda is citing is clearly about shared community amenities like pools and tennis courts. It has never been applied to private property purchased and maintained by individual homeowners. So I can tell her to pound sand? I asked hopefully. Not quite that simple, Sarah said. The problem is that HOA bylaws can be interpreted broadly, and until a court says otherwise, the board can enforce their interpretation. They can fine you, and those fines can add up quickly. The question is whether you want to fight this in court or try to negotiate a settlement. What kind of settlement? Maybe you agree to provide limited power to 1 or 2 homes during outages, with strict guidelines about what can be plugged in and with fuel costs shared. It is not ideal, but it might keep the peace. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to fight on principle. But another part of me knew that living in a neighborhood at war with the HOA president was going to make my life miserable in ways beyond just this generator issue. Let me think about it over the weekend, I said. Fair enough, Sarah said. But Oliver, if you do decide to share the generator, even partially, get everything in writing. Specify exactly what you are responsible for and what you are not. Because if something goes wrong, you want to be protected. Her words would turn out to be prophetic. I spent Friday evening checking the weather forecast obsessively. A heat wave was building, with temperatures expected to hit 116 on Saturday and Sunday. The power grid was already strained. Rolling blackouts were almost guaranteed. Sure enough, at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon, everything went dark. I was in my living room when it happened, the sudden silence as the AC cut off almost shocking after the constant hum. Within 60 seconds, my generator kicked on automatically. The lights flickered back to life and the AC resumed its battle against the Arizona heat. I walked outside to check on the generator. It was running smoothly, not even working particularly hard. My house drew about 6,000 watts when everything was running, well within its capacity. I stood there for a moment, enjoying the fact that I had prepared for exactly this situation. Then I saw Brenda marching up the street with 3 other people in tow. She was carrying a bundle of heavy-duty extension cords. Oliver, she called out, the power is out. Time to fulfill your community obligation. Brenda, I have not agreed to anything, I said. I am still consulting with my lawyer. The fine started the moment the power went out, she said. You are already at $200. Every day this outage continues, that is another $200. Or you can be a decent neighbor and help people. Behind her, I recognized Carlos Ramirez and his wife Linda, along with Tom Henderson, one of the board members who had voted with Brenda. They all looked hot and miserable and hopeful. Please, Oliver, Linda Ramirez said. We have 3 kids. Our youngest is only 2. It is so hot in there. I felt the guilt trip working exactly as Brenda had intended. These were not bad people. They were my neighbors, people I had shared cookouts and casual conversations with over the years. They were suffering, and I had the means to help. Against every instinct screaming at me that this was a terrible idea, I heard myself say, okay, but we do this carefully. 1 house at a time and only essential items. Refrigerators and maybe 1 fan each. That is it. Brenda smiled triumphantly. That is all anyone is asking for. It was not all anyone was asking for, of course. That became clear within the first 10 minutes. We ran a heavy-duty extension cord from my garage to the Ramirez house across the street. Carlos plugged in their refrigerator first, which was reasonable. Then Linda plugged in a box fan. Then their kids came running out asking if they could plug in the TV and the PlayStation because they were bored. No, I said firmly. Just the fridge and the fan, that is the deal. Carlos looked embarrassed but nodded. Kids, we talked about this, just the essentials. Next, we ran a cord to Tom Henderson's house. He wanted his refrigerator, a fan, and his CPAP machine, which I could not argue with since it was medical equipment. But then his wife came out and plugged in their coffee maker. Really? I said. Coffee is essential? I have not had my coffee since this morning, she said defensively. It is just for a few minutes. I was about to argue when Brenda pulled out another extension cord. Mrs. Chen's house next, she announced. Hang on, I said. That is 3 houses. My generator is already running at near capacity. Nonsense, Brenda said. It is running fine. I can hear it. That does not mean it has unlimited capacity, I said. I walked back to my garage and checked the load on the generator. It was pulling about 90%. We were right at the edge of what it could handle, and we still had Mrs. Chen's house to go. Brenda, this is too much, I said. We need to wait. If someone unplugs something, then maybe Mrs. Chen needs her oxygen concentrator, Brenda said. That stopped me. She has oxygen equipment? Well, she might need it. She has breathing issues. I pulled out my phone and called Mrs. Chen. She answered on the first ring. Oliver, is Brenda bothering you? She asked immediately. She says you need an oxygen concentrator, I said. I absolutely do not, Mrs. Chen said firmly. I have asthma, but I use an inhaler. I do not need any special equipment. Is she trying to make you feel guilty again? Yes, I said, looking directly at Brenda, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. You tell her I said to leave you alone, Mrs. Chen continued. I am perfectly fine. I am sitting in my living room with the windows open and a battery fan, and I have a book. I am having a lovely afternoon. I thanked her and hung up. Mrs. Chen does not need any power, I told Brenda. Well, what about the Martins? Brenda said, gesturing to another house down the street. They have a baby. The Martins are in California visiting family, I said. I knew because Jim Martin had asked me to keep an eye on their place. Brenda, this is exactly what I was worried about. You are trying to hook up the entire neighborhood to a generator that cannot handle it. It is handling it fine right now, Brenda insisted. As if on cue, Mrs. Henderson walked out of her house carrying a hairdryer. She plugged it into the extension cord running from my garage. Whoa, 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 I said, jogging over to her. You cannot use that. High wattage appliances will overload the system. It is just for a minute, she said. I need to dry my hair. Unplug it, I said. Now she huffed but complied. This is ridiculous. What good is a generator if we cannot use it properly? It is good if it works and does not break, I said. I was getting a headache. The temperature was still over 100 degrees, and I had been out in the sun for almost an hour now, dealing with this circus. I went back to check the generator again. The load had spiked when Mrs. Henderson plugged in the hairdryer, but had returned to normal when she unplugged it. We were still running too hot for my comfort, but everything was technically within operational parameters. Okay, I said, returning to the group that had gathered in my driveway. Here are the rules. No high wattage appliances. That means no hair dryers, no space heaters, no coffee makers, no toasters, nothing like that. Refrigerators, fans, and necessary medical equipment only. If I see anyone violating these rules, I am unplugging everyone. Brenda started to object, but Carlos cut her off. That is fair, Oliver. Thank you for doing this. We appreciate it. Several other neighbors murmured their agreement. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Fine, I will send out an email to everyone explaining the rules. For the next hour, things were calm. I checked on the generator every 15 minutes, and the load remained steady. People were following the rules, or at least not getting caught breaking them. I started to think maybe this would work out after all. Then at around 5 in the evening, I heard a loud pop from my garage, followed by the generator's engine straining. I ran outside just in time to see smoke starting to drift from the transfer switch. The generator was screaming, the engine redlining as it tried to supply more power than it was capable of producing. I hit the emergency shutoff and everything went dark. My house, the Ramirez house, the Henderson house, all of it. What did you do? Brenda shrieked, appearing from somewhere down the street. Someone overloaded it, I said, my heart pounding. I opened the transfer switch panel and immediately saw the problem. Two of the breakers had tripped and I could smell burnt wiring. Damn it. What did I say about high wattage appliances? We went door to door. At the Ramirez house, everything looked fine. The refrigerator and fan were the only things plugged in. But at the Henderson house, we found the culprit. Tom Henderson was in his garage, looking guilty as hell, standing next to a window air conditioning unit that was plugged into my extension cord. I just thought, he stammered. It was so hot and the generators seemed to be handling everything fine, so I figured one small AC unit would not hurt. A window unit pulls 1500 watts, I said, my voice shaking with anger. On top of everything else running, you just fried my transfer switch. Well, fix it, Brenda demanded. Get the generator back online. I cannot just fix it, I snapped. The transfer switch is damaged. It needs to be replaced. That is $1,000 part plus labor, and good luck getting an electrician out here on a Saturday evening during a heat wave. This is your fault for not making the rules clearer, Brenda said. I stared at her in disbelief. I specifically said no high wattage appliances. Tom decided to ignore that. How is that my fault? If you had properly sized your generator for community use, this would not have happened, she said. I sized it for my house, I said, because it is my generator. The argument continued in my driveway as the sun set and the temperature remained brutally hot. Other neighbors started coming out, wanting to know why the power had gone off. When they learned what happened, opinions split quickly. Some people thought Tom was at fault for being greedy. Others agreed with Brenda that I should have somehow anticipated this and prevented it. Nobody seemed to want to acknowledge that the real problem was forcing me to share the generator in the first place. Finally, around 8 in the evening, the main power came back on. The relief was immediate. Air conditioners hummed to life up and down the street. People retreated back into their houses. The crisis was over, at least for now, except it was not over for me. I spent the next hour inspecting the damage to my generator system. The transfer switch was definitely toast. 2 of the internal breakers were burnt out and there was damage to the wiring that I was not qualified to assess. I would need a professional Sunday morning. I called an emergency electrician. He could not come out until Monday, but he quoted me $1,500 for the parts and labor, assuming there was no additional damage to the generator itself. If the generator was damaged, I could be looking at several thousand more. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and contemplating my options. I could pay for the repairs and then tell Brenda and the HOA to go to hell. I could pay for the repairs and demand that Tom Henderson reimburse me. I could refuse to pay and let the generator sit broken until the HOA backed off. None of the options were good. My phone rang. It was Carlos Ramirez. Oliver, I just wanted to apologize, he said. Linda and I feel terrible about what happened. Tom had no right to plug in that AC unit. I appreciate that, Carlos, I said. We talked to some other neighbors last night, he continued. A bunch of us are willing to chip in for the repair costs. We know this is not fair to you. That is generous, I said, meaning it. But the real issue is that this is going to happen again the next time the power goes out. Brenda is not going to stop pushing this. Yeah, Carlos said quietly. We figured that too. For what it is worth, I think she is wrong. This whole thing is wrong. After we hung up, I made a decision. I called Sarah Chen, the lawyer. I want to file an injunction, I told her. I want the HOA blocked from forcing me to share the generator. And I want Tom Henderson to pay for the damages. That is going to mean court, Sarah warned. Are you sure? I am sure, I said. This is about property rights. If the HOA can force me to share my generator, what else can they force me to share? My car? My lawnmower? It is a slippery slope, and I am not sliding down it. Okay, Sarah said. I will draw up the paperwork. We will file on Monday. The electrician came out Monday afternoon. The news was worse than expected. Not only was the transfer switch fried, but the overload had damaged the generator's voltage regulator. Total repair cost, $4,200. I sat down on my garage floor and just stared at the number on the invoice. $4,000 in damage because Tom Henderson could not follow simple instructions. That evening, Brenda showed up at my door again, this time with Tom in tow. He looked sheepish but not particularly remorseful. Tom wants to apologize, Brenda announced. I am sorry about the generator, Tom said. I really did not think it would cause a problem. It caused a $4,000 problem, I said. The voltage regulator is blown, along with the transfer switch. Tom's face went pale. $4,000? $4,200. To be exact, I said, and I expect you to pay for it. Now hold on, Brenda interjected. That seems excessive. Tom made a simple mistake. A simple mistake that destroyed my property, I said. Property that I was forced to share against my will. You were not forced, Brenda said. You agreed to help your neighbors, under threat of fines from the HOA, I said. Fines that you now owe me, by the way. The power was out for 6 hours on Saturday. That is $200. You did not comply with the community resource guidelines, Brenda said. If anything, you owe the HOA for failing to properly maintain equipment used for community purposes. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting into a shouting match on my doorstep was not going to solve anything. You will be hearing from my lawyer, I said, and closed the door. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and escalating neighborhood tension. Sarah filed the injunction, along with a lawsuit against Tom Henderson for the repair costs and a separate complaint against the HOA for the improper fines and violation of property rights. The HOA board responded by doubling down. They issued a formal notice that I was in violation of community standards and increased the fines to $500 a day for any future non-compliance during power emergencies. They also started citing me for other minor violations. My trash cans visible from the street 2 hours past pickup time, a small crack in my driveway, grass that was allegedly a half-inch too long. It was harassment, plain and simple. Sarah assured me it would actually help our case, showing a pattern of retaliation. But it made my daily life miserable. Other neighbors started taking sides. Some, like Carlos Ramirez and Frank Morrison, were vocally supportive. Others seemed to believe Brenda's narrative that I was a selfish hoarder who cared more about money than community welfare. I started getting dirty looks at the mailbox in the grocery store. The hearing for the injunction was scheduled for late September. In the meantime, the generator sat in my garage, still broken. The repair company could not get the parts for 3 weeks, and I was not about to pay for rush shipping when I was already out over $4,000. During this time, Phoenix experienced 2 more significant power outages. I sweated through both of them in my powerless house while Brenda made a show of checking on vulnerable residents and posting on the neighborhood Facebook page about the importance of community support during emergencies. The subtext was clear. This is what happens when selfish people prioritize property rights over helping others. What Brenda did not post about was the generator fund she had promised. It turned out there was no community fund. No one had contributed anything. Several neighbors, including the ones who had actually used my generator during that disastrous Saturday, told me privately that they had never been asked to contribute and would have declined if they had been. The whole thing had been Brenda's power play from the start, and they had all been pawns in it. Just like me, finally in mid-October we had our day in court. It was not a full trial, just a preliminary hearing for the injunction, but it was enough to get both sides in front of a judge. The HOA brought their lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit who argued that community welfare took precedence over individual property rights in emergency situations. He cited several cases where HOAs had been granted broad authority to manage community resources during disasters. Sarah countered that none of those cases involved privately purchased equipment maintained at individual expense. She also presented the evidence of the damage caused by the forced sharing arrangement and the retaliatory fines the HOA had issued after I pushed back. Tom Henderson was called to testify about the air conditioning unit incident. Under questioning, he admitted that I had clearly stated no high-wattage appliances and that he had deliberately ignored that instruction because he thought the generator could handle it. Did Mr. Thompson ever represent that his generator could power multiple air conditioning units? Sarah asked. No, Tom admitted. He said just refrigerators and fans. But you plugged in an air conditioning unit anyway. Yes. And you understand that this decision directly caused the damage to his generator? Tom hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Brenda was called next. She was dressed in a conservative business suit and maintained her confident demeanor throughout most of her testimony. She insisted that the HOA had every right to manage emergency resources and that the community resource clause in the bylaws was clear. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said during cross-examination. The clause you are citing specifically mentions community amenities like swimming pools and recreation areas. Can you explain how a privately owned generator purchased and installed by Mr. Thompson at his own expense qualifies as a community amenity? It provides a critical function during emergencies, Brenda said. That makes it a community resource. By that logic, would a homeowner's personal vehicle be considered a community resource because it could be used to evacuate people during an emergency? That is different. Brenda said, though she looked less certain. How is it different? A car is transportation. A generator provides essential services like power. So does a car, Sarah said. It transports people, which is essential during emergencies. Should the HOA be able to demand that Mr. Thompson or any other homeowner use their vehicles to shuttle neighbors around during a crisis? That is not what we are discussing, Brenda said, her composure slipping. Actually, it is exactly what we are discussing, Sarah said. The principle that the HOA can commandeer private property for community use whenever they deem it necessary. Where does it end? The judge, a middle-aged woman named Harriet Wells, had been taking notes throughout the proceedings. Now she set down her pen and looked directly at Brenda. Mrs. Patterson, I have reviewed the HOA bylaws in question, Judge Wells said. The language about community resources is clearly intended to address amenities that the HOA itself owns and maintains, things like pools, clubhouses, and shared green spaces. Can you provide any documentation showing that this clause has ever been applied to private homeowner property before this case? Brenda shifted uncomfortably. This is the first time the situation has come up. So you are attempting to create a new interpretation of existing bylaws without a formal vote of the homeowners? The board has the authority to interpret bylaws as needed, Brenda said. Within reason, Judge Wells said, and with consideration for established precedent and property rights. From what I am hearing today, the board made a unilateral decision to commandeer private property, and when the owner objected, you retaliated with escalating fines and citations for minor violations. Is that accurate? We were enforcing community standards, Brenda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Judge Wells looked down at the papers in front of her. I am granting the preliminary injunction, she said. The HOA is hereby barred from requiring Mr. Thompson to share his generator or any other privately owned equipment. The fines issued for non-compliance are vacated. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to cease any retaliatory actions, including the recent citations for minor violations that appear to be pretextual. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Sarah squeezed my arm, smiling. As for the damages, Judge Wells continued, looking at Tom Henderson. Mr. Henderson, you admitted under oath that you deliberately violated the guidelines Mr. Thompson established, and that your actions directly caused over $4,000 in damage to his property. Do you dispute this? Tom looked at his lawyer, who whispered something to him. Then he turned back to the judge. No, Your Honor, I do not dispute it. Then I am ordering you to reimburse Mr. Thompson the full cost of repairs within 30 days. If you fail to do so, Mr. Thompson can pursue collections, and you will also be liable for his legal costs in doing so. The gavel came down and it was over. Brenda looked like she had been slapped. Tom looked sick. I just felt tired. Outside the courthouse, Sarah and I stood in the October sunshine, which felt considerably cooler than the brutal heat of July and August. That went about as well as we could have hoped, Sarah said. The injunction will hold unless they appeal, but I doubt they will. The judge made it pretty clear how she feels about the HOA's position. What about Brenda? I asked. Is she going to face any consequences for this? That is up to your community, Sarah said. The judge cannot remove her from the HOA board, but you could call for a vote of no confidence. Get the other homeowners to vote her out. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Brenda gone, held accountable for the chaos she had caused, but another part of me just wanted this whole thing to be over. I will think about it, I said. Tom Henderson paid the $4,200 within 2 weeks. I do not know if he had the money saved or if he took out a loan, but the check cleared, and I was made whole. The generator was repaired and back in working order by early November. The neighborhood dynamic took longer to heal. Some people remained convinced that I had been selfish, that I should have found a way to make the sharing arrangement work. But most people, once they heard the full story and learned about the damage and the legal findings, came around. Several neighbors apologized for believing Brenda's version of events without hearing my side. Carlos Ramirez became a good friend through all of this. He started organizing neighborhood barbecues that deliberately excluded HOA business. Just neighbors getting together without Brenda's drama. Those events did more to rebuild community trust than anything else. As for Brenda, she remained HOA president but seemed significantly diminished. The board voted to restrict her authority over bylaw interpretations, requiring full homeowner votes for any major policy changes. She fought it but lost 3-2, with even Tom Henderson voting against her. In December, Frank Morrison approached me about running for the HO board in the next election. I declined. I had no desire to spend my evenings arguing about paint colors and lawn maintenance schedules. But I did agree to help Frank campaign for president, and he won easily. Brenda chose not to run for re-election, which surprised no one. The following summer brought more heat waves and more power outages. Each time the power went out, I ran my generator for my house only. Nobody complained. Nobody demanded access. A few neighbors asked for advice on buying their own generators, and I was happy to share what I had learned. Mrs. Chen did eventually get a small generator of her own, a modest unit that could run her refrigerator and a fan. I helped her get it installed properly. She invited me over for dinner afterward, another excellent casserole, and we laughed about the absurdity of the previous year. You know what the funny thing is, she said as we sat in her kitchen. If Brenda had just asked nicely, if she had approached you as a neighbor instead of an HOA dictator, you probably would have helped people. She was right, I would have. I would have run a cord to her house in an emergency, or to any neighbor who really needed it. But I would have done it on my terms, carefully and safely, not as a mandated community resource free for all. The whole situation had taught me something important about HOAs and about people in general. When you give someone a little bit of authority, they sometimes get drunk on it. They start believing that rules and bylaws matter more than relationships and common sense. Brenda had been so focused on what she could force me to do that she never stopped to consider whether she should. In the end, the generator incident became neighborhood legend, the story everyone told new residents as a warning about HOA overreach. "Remember when Brenda tried to make Oliver share his generator?" they would say, shaking their heads. What a disaster. I kept that generator running for years afterward. I maintained it religiously, changed the oil on schedule, ran it monthly to keep everything lubricated. It never failed me, and I never had to share it with anyone I did not choose to help. That felt like the right ending to a story that could have gone much worse. Tom Henderson and I never became friends, but we reached a civil understanding. He had made a mistake, he had paid for it, and we moved on. He installed his own generator the following spring, properly sized for his house, and we occasionally compared notes on maintenance and fuel efficiency. It was not friendship, but it was functional neighborliness, which was enough. Brenda moved away about 18 months after the court hearing. I heard she took an HOA position in a community in Tucson. I felt a brief moment of sympathy for those homeowners, then reminded myself that it was not my problem anymore. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized it was never really about the generator. It was about control and boundaries and what happens when people forget that communities are built on voluntary cooperation, not forced compliance. You cannot mandate generosity, you cannot legislate kindness, and you definitely cannot overload a 12,000-watt generator to power 4 houses without consequences. The generator hummed quietly in my garage as I wrote all this down, a steady, reliable presence that had caused so much conflict and taught me so many lessons. It was just a machine, a tool for converting fuel into electricity. But for one chaotic summer in Phoenix, it had become a symbol of everything wrong with HOA culture and everything right about standing your ground when you know you are right. I hoped I would never have to fight that kind of battle again. But if I did, I knew I would be ready. I had learned that property rights matter, that documentation is everything, and that sometimes the right thing to do is say no, even when everyone is pressuring you to say yes. The generator continued its quiet hum, powering my life, protecting my comfort, and asking nothing of anyone else. Just the way it should be.